time to get unbuffered. It's not a problem for this crew, although I will concede that this is the second time I'm recording an introduction in which I said, never again will I have a chance to record a show before the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States of America.
And here we are.
Irony, not lost on Sean Gonsalves here, who gave a nice little discussion before I cut him off. Welcome back to the show, Sean.
Man, it seems like it's been forever since I've been on.
And we got Karl Bodie coming in. Welcome back, Karl.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So we're talking briefly before we get into the discussion, which we're going to talk a little bit about a great article that Sean and Karl wrote that was published on The Verge, which is a wonderful set of podcasts and a website with all kinds of great reporting, great news source. We're also going to talk a little bit about the hearings that just happened with Ariel Roth. And for this time, we'll talk about something else, but that'll be a big surprise. But we wanted to kick it off by noting our mixed feelings that we have about July 4th, which I will just say it's mixed in the sense of like the sorrow of all the like horrible tragedies and mistakes that were made. But I really try to focus on the positive and the things that the United States has done well. And frankly, some of those things you don't really pay as much attention to until Elon Musk takes a butcher knife to them or a cleaver or a chainsaw and destroys it and upends the lives of millions of people around the world, because it turns out USAID was important. It was really, really, really important for millions upon millions of children. But the United States has done a lot of things that I think are worth learning from in positive ways and duplicating, replicating. So I've given Sean a book, and I've talked about this book many times, Liberty from All Masters. I think it's great. Sean was just going to tell us a little bit about a few thoughts he had on it as we head into the fourth here.
That's right. Well, first I should say happy birthday, America. 250 years old, which isn't actually that old when you look at like the history of other countries. So we're pretty like
Cabo Verde.
Well, actually, that country's even younger in terms of independence. But I'll say that as you alluded to, America's history is super complicated um, and a lot of tragedy, and it feels like we're in a moment where a lot of the liberty that many of us have taken for granted um, seem to be under unique threat right now at the moment, not the least of which is, and of course, some of it is being leveraged by like all this new technology and everything around. But the thing that I appreciated that struck me the most about Liberty from All Masters, and I had mentioned before, it's similar to a book by Richard Rorty called Achieving Our Country. And one of the things in this book, Liberty from All Masters, Barry C. Lynn wrote, is that he talked about the anti-monopoly roots of the revolutionary foundings of this country. And that is something that I think is worth thinking about and talking about. So, I'm in Massachusetts where, the lore of the Boston Tea Party runs pretty deep, but everybody's heard about it and everybody has these different ideas. But it wasn't really until this book that I really had ever considered the case that he makes, which is that at the heart of the Boston Tea Party and the spark of the revolution for there to be an independent United States of America was really an anti-monopoly movement, a movement that said we don't want to be buying tea from Britain. We shouldn't be forced to. We're a free country. We're free people. We shouldn't have to do it. And the work that we do is really focused around anti-monopoly. And so I really appreciated that kind of framing around the work, not only helping me understand better the work that we're doing, but just how rooted it is and how wrong it is for us to allow a certain segment of the population, just because they always talk about liberty or freedom, that they should be the only ones that they should somehow have a monopoly on even like those ideas and what those things really mean.
Yeah, we gave them a shot. They've ruined it. Like, you take a survey right now and you ask whether or not there's like a sense of patriotism among the left. I hope it's greater than it had been before, because we can't let the good things that are part of the United States of America be sullied by the bad things, to paraphrase some of the others. Last week, I was talking at the Tribal Broadband Bootcamp, our 5th Tribal Broadband Bootcamp. We talked about that in last week's show. And while I was there, I was just saying, like,
fifth year, not fifth boot camp.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. 5th year. Sorry, my head is still recovering from what a wonderful week and trying to get back in the swing of things. Our 5th anniversary, 23 tribal broadband boot camps, and I was talking about how it is really frustrating to talk about this this in the sense that like most of the people in the room are members of tribes, tribal nations, or they are from Indian country more generally. And it's weird for me to stand up there and be like, you know what? The United States history of United States communications policy is actually pretty good. It's really a global leader in trying to make sure that everyone is well connected. If you were white, you probably had a good telephone connection, 30, 40 years ago, right? We made sure that just about everyone. Now, the tribal nations were largely left out. The telephone penetration on reservation was quite poor, actually. And you could certainly head to places in the South where Black communities have been sort of left out. But if you're in the Appalachians, your deep poverty generally did not prevent you in the same way from having a telephone. And that's because of government policy that worked. And right now we're dealing with the big companies trying to figure out how to scrap that and go to a system in which, like, if you can afford it, you get a good connection, and maybe it works well all the time and maybe it doesn't. And like, who knows? It's not that important. But like, the United States has a history of taking it seriously and never doing it perfectly and always having room for improvement that is significant, particularly on reservation, but also appreciating that we've gone farther than many European nations to make sure that the most remote farmers have good access to the telephone. And we should be continuing that rather than just giving up on it and letting Elon Musk decide who pays what and when. So, Karl, I don't know if you have any reaction to all that before we go into the first topic.
I will say we have some nice mountains. I think our mountains are very nice. I think a lot of the rivers are pretty cool.
If you're into natural disasters, you can find amazing natural disasters.
I mean, the
here.
geography out west is incredible.
Come on, man.
I have
music.
I have a lot. The music is, yep. The food has its moments. There's a lot I like about it. The humans aren't always at the top of that list. And I think we have a lot of work to do, and I have very complicated.
So with you, but I spent 4 months in the Middle East. I spent a month in Africa and Tanzania, and I've traveled a little bit in other places. And I'll say that, like, every time I travel elsewhere, I'm reminded that there's great people elsewhere, and there's also really bad people elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's human beings, right? It's just humans. Yeah, I have very complicated mixed feelings about all of it. It's thorny. We're in a very, very dangerous territory right now, and if we don't address it, this is not going to last. Any of the stuff we understand as a functional federal government.
And that would be bad, right?
Yeah. I mean, foundationally poor for people to have the federal government collapse into a heaping pile of rubble overseen by tech oligarchs. Yeah, I think that would probably be bad. I do admire our resiliency. I admire at its best our inclusiveness in terms of cultures, which we used to actually defend. It has its moments.
We've preserved a free press, and The Verge has used that to publish really great investigations. They do great podcasts. It's got a good eye for a good tone for sarcasm and stuff. And they occasionally hire, they take pieces from amazing writers, right?
Yeah, they're really one of the few tech outlets, I think, that still, Wired, Ars Technica, and Verge are probably like the three remaining outlets that do tech policy and tech coverage really pretty consistently well, and that speaks to their editors and chiefs who have some courage in terms of putting stuff out there that's both challenging and sometimes putting out like complicated policy screeds, that a lot of websites don't want to even touch.
And I appreciate the segue into this article, but I will say that when you said that we've preserved a free press, that word "preserve" is doing a lot of work there, because I don't know.
We've pickled a few segments of the free press.
I think I will say, I feel like podcasting is a direct embodiment. If Benjamin Franklin was around right now, that man would be maybe not just making podcasts, but running an aggregation facility to get podcasts together. We have preserved the free press. It's one of the things that I feel pretty strongly about. The corporate control of the free press, of the press, is certainly also at a high right now. But if you want to find the trashiest trash, you can find that. If you want to find good stuff, you can find it. So, but let's move on before we run out of time. Before we even get to the first topic, Sean, what did you write about?
Well, it wasn't just me. Karl and I kind of
right. I was a plural you, but it's not clear because the English language sucks.
Exactly. When I was a kid, there was this cartoon, the Wonder Twins, and they would, put their fists together and turn and stuff. That's what me and Karl did. But I will say that what we wanted to try to do is explain to folks who haven't been following this closely, which is pretty much everybody, what happened to this BEAD program, this program that, was part of the infrastructure law that was supposed to be, or at least aimed to be, this once-in-a-generation federal program that was supposed to solve the digital divide once and for all. And it was this program that has had fits and starts and lots of complaints about delays, and then it's changed quite a bit. And so we wanted to capture that in a piece. And Carl and I decided that we were going to begin the piece by talking about a rocket explosion down there in Cape Canaveral a couple of, well, I guess about a month or so ago. Carl, why did we want to start that piece with the explosion of a rocket?
Well, the original, it starts with the two pieces of legislation in 2021, the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, and then the infrastructure bill, which both took very different routes towards trying to bridge the digital divide and get affordable internet access. ARPA was very loosely ruled. States had a lot of control over how money was spent. They threw it at fiber networks. The networks are relatively impressively quickly deployed by everything we've seen. And then BEAD, which was part of the infrastructure bill, had $42.5 billion dedicated to internet access to shore up coverage in a lot of neglected areas. And the original BEAD program focused heavily on fiber optic internet, pushing that as deeply into neighborhoods as you could, a lot of rural areas that it didn't have good connectivity, that had been on shitty cable and DSL modems for the last 20 years. So the original idea of the plan was great. It just took a lot of time. And the way Congress structured it, it required that we remap broadband access. It required that we deploy the stuff equitably. It required the federal government work closely with states. That's a very complicated muck of soup for a country with a barely functional Congress to dig into, but they did. The problem is
no effective telecom regulator, really.
Right. We don't really have functional oversight at this point. So the fact that this exists at all is kind of miraculous. But last election season, Republicans started complaining about how long it was taking. Every other day, you'd see something in the press about how the BEAD program's a bureaucracy. It's a big mess. It's taking too long. Nobody's connected. The second the Trump administration gets into office, they immediately introduce all sorts of cumbersome new delays. They strip away most of the oversight. They eliminate language requiring that the broadband is affordable and evenly deployed, and they take a huge chunk of the $42.5 billion and they funnel it away from affordable and high quality fiber and towards billionaires like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos for their low Earth orbit satellite ventures. Which
right. They didn't use novelty checks, but they really should have.
Right,
like the giant ones that are huge.
Yeah, Ed McMahon victory check. That's what we needed to dole out.
And so we started the piece off with the rocket explosion because the Blue Origin New Glenn rocket that exploded on the launch pad was supposed to be the rocket that was going to bring up some of the Amazon LEO satellites for Jeff Bezos. So that was we thought was a unintentionally perfect metaphor for what's happened to the BEAD program, which is that it started off with these lofty goals. It was really focused heavily on fiber and investing in stuff that was going to last for generations instead of just shoveling money over to the world's richest people for satellite internet that needs to be replaced every few years and all that kind of stuff. And lo and behold, the rocket explodes, and that we felt like was kind of a good metaphor for what's happened to the program. And so in the article, I think a couple things that are worth pointing out is, for example, what it means on the ground. There was one community, we spoke to the folks down in East Carroll Parish in Louisiana. That was a state that was going to do like 90% fiber project after the benefit of the bargain round that the Trump administration put in that delayed this program further. That number dropped to 78%. And for Lake Providence, which is in East Carroll Parish, the Louisiana's original plan that had been approved a year ago, that community was going to get a community-wide fiber network. The state broadband office even said, yeah, the ISP, we're going to give them $6.2 million and build it out. Benefit of the bargain comes along and goes up. Nope, none of those locations are available for fiber. That money's now going to go to Starlink. And now those people down in East Carroll Parish, one of the most economically challenged areas of the state, are now saying,
of the nation,
are now being told, well, too bad. Sign up for Starlink, which you could have already signed up for, which nobody did because it's expensive and it doesn't work like fiber. And so that was sort of an on-the-ground example in the article. There's a lot in there, and I'm quite frankly surprised that we got as much as we could get in there, even as difficult as it was to keep it under like 2,400 words or whatever the word count was.
Yeah. It's the biggest thing to remember or to think about is that a lot of these subsidies going to Musk and Bezos are for services that they already deployed or already plan to deploy. And these are both guys who constantly lament subsidies and insist that subsidies are terrible and we should get rid of subsidies. And here they are gobbling up what could be potentially billions of dollars for services they already plan to deploy. That's a huge waste of money. It's probably going to wind up being duplicative because we're going to have to go back into a lot of these areas and deploy fiber anyway. So it's a real abandonment of principles and a kind of an embarrassing failure for a program that honestly had some decent potential to really change people's lives.
Well, and the change on the ground couldn't be more significant because before you were going to have thousands of dollars per home, in some cases more than $10,000 per home coming into the area. That money was going to go to crews that live in the area to build the networks, and then it was going to go to people to maintain the networks, to deliver a service that would be affordable and would be provided by a company or a cooperative that was likely using local tax preparation and local marketing and stuff like that, rather than going to Elon Musk, who is not doing any of those things. None of that money benefits them. In fact, like the only thing you could say about SpaceX is that it's a vacuum cleaner of resources out of communities.
That's exactly it.
Now, I mean, the thing is that like if you're on a mountaintop, great. I talk constantly about how Starlink is a miraculous, really amazing system, but it is not a system for communities because the density of development often precludes everyone from having service. It is not a universal solution. So this is like, it's just worse all around. We are wasting money on services that the private sector was already investing in. That money is not going to go to like providing affordable services to people that need it. We're going to have kids continuing to come home from school not having decent internet access. It's just, you have fewer jobs, and just every part of this is just bad. And the thing that kills me, Karl, and I think Karl before you, Sean, but like, is that like for the next 5 or 10 years, we'll have people being like, oh man, like why is service so bad in some of these places? It's inevitable.
The thing that kills me is I know I'm going to have to write about this. We're all going to have to write about this for the next 5 years and watch people's slowly dawning awareness that, that they got ripped off by the government. And then all the people responsible for it, all the people that prioritize Starlink and prioritize giving money to billionaires, they're all going to disappear. They're going to have nothing to say. They're not going to be in policy. They're going to be off on some new adventure. Well, real people like us are stuck here trying to dig through the mess and explain to people why they got ripped off by the government.
And where proof of that is, and one of the things that was interesting in seeing this piece published in The Verge is looking at the numerous comments under the story where we talk about all these things. Now, granted, certain things you breeze over, you wish you could have spent more time kind of explaining why on certain things, but it's amazing to me the amount of people, and certainly not the majority of people in the comments, but the amount of people both in the comment section, but also you see it online, that have this idea that since Starlink is in space and it's Elon Musk, that satellite is like this future next gen technology, and that wireline connections is like this old stuff. And so, yeah, Karl, you're going to be writing about this, or both of us are going to be writing about this for the next 5 to 10 years, because there is this perception, and Elon is a master at PR in convincing people of stuff, of smoke and mirrors.
We're talking about this. Southern California has roughly the same number of like wireless mobile macro sites, like for mobile cell service. Southern California alone has roughly the same number of antennas as Musk has put in space. You drive around, you can't get good service in LA. Like in a few places you can, some places it's okay, and other places it's terrible, just like everywhere else.
Right.
And like the idea that like, oh, well, we put them in space where now millions of people can access each satellite rather than hundreds or thousands. And it's just, there's magic. You got the underwear gnome problem. They really, we're stuck on step 2.
Yeah, they really do. A lot of people, I think, and Joe Rogan had Musk on and they talked about Starlink, and then there was a big conversation on the right about Starlink, and they really view it as kind of like this magic pixie dust that just has no limits and will immediately scale to like 500 million subscribers with no issues. When, there's data, and even Elon Musk himself admitted earlier that it doesn't scale properly. It can't serve, dense, even rural communities on any sort of high volume. The congestion starts to be a problem. The prices are high. Yeah. As, more people flood to the network, it's going to have all sorts of weird restrictions in terms of congestion and network limitations. And how can you run 4K video after 10 p.m.? It's going to be, low Earth orbit satellite is a lot better than the older satellite broadband systems we all know and hate. But it still has the same physics problem. The capacity is
Sean,
just not there.
if you want to add anything, it's got to be new. It can't be anything we've already talked about in past episodes.
No, it's just that it's worth noting that none of this conversation means that we're saying that Starlink doesn't work or that it's not, because people miss this all the time. It's like you look in the comments and there'll be somebody saying, but like, I live in an area where there was no broadband and I have Starlink now and it works great. Cool. And that is so wonderful for you. But but this idea that just because something works for you in that one household is not the same thing as saying that this is going to work at scale or the solution for hundreds of millions of homes.
Yeah. We have this restaurant that I love here, Nashville Hot Chicken, or it's a Nashville Coop, which is it's a hot chicken place where they took Ethiopian and East African spices and mixed it in with that, and it's amazing. But I think there's still going to be hunger and like food insecurity in St. Paul after this restaurant, is in business for a while.
Probably so. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I want to move on to the next topic, which is a hearing that was today. Sean, you listened in on it, and I think you and Jordan conspired to find a few clips that I have to respond to sight unseen. We're going to talk about here.
That's right.
Say, I was critical of the Biden administration's deployment of this. I was frustrated that after 3 years, we didn't have any projects in the ground, and I thought that the criticism of the Biden administration was in many respects very fair. And this administration came in promising to speed up the timelines. And after months of silence on BEAD funding at the beginning of last year, NTIA requires states to go through an entirely new process, the benefit of the bargain round. California has still not received its funding for this critical program. California is one of only 2 states that has yet to receive final proposal approval from NTIA. And we know that if California were to receive NTIA approval today, my state will still need to seek final approval from NIST, receive the notice of its award, sign its award agreement, a process that is likely to take anywhere from an additional 6 months to a year. So we all know California will not be seeing the money anytime soon, leaving our unserved and underserved rural and urban communities behind. Administrator Roth, can you explain how changes brought under your leadership have fulfilled your claims of accelerating BEAD deployment? And when should Californians expect to see shovels in the ground?
Thank you, Congressman, and it was great to talk to you in your office. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain some of the challenges that we've seen in California. I told you there were some mapping anomalies. We found, we oversight of the program, and conducting our due diligence is really important to ensure protection of taxpayer dollars. And so we had to work with the state to ensure that we address those mapping challenges. We're working with the state. We look forward to receiving California's revised proposal so that we can get California and all states and territories across the finish line. But I think that the data speaks for itself with respect to expediting projects. Thanks to our restoring the program to its statutory mission, we've already seen.
You said that before. You said we've got projects in Louisiana, we got a project in Nebraska. And that, to me, that's not that great. Well, what we have now is, instead of a 3-year delay, we have a 5-year delay.
Let me start with 2 responses. One is the sort of honest response, which is that NTIA and Ariel Roth, the leadership, are incompetent. They don't know what they're doing. And they made a bunch of wild claims that they would get all this stuff done, not knowing how to do it. The whole thing about mapping anomalies, yeah, that's right. And the question is, are we going to hold up a connection for millions of people so that you can try to stop one apartment building that might not be permissible from getting service? Like this has been one of the consistent issues that we've had, is that a lot of the conservative members, the Republicans, have said, we can't solve the problem for 100,000 people unless we make sure there's not one undeserving person in there. And that's a good recipe for not getting done. But the second reaction that I would have is that this is the plan. They don't want California to get the money.
Yeah.
And so like that's what's going on.
Correct. And they want to find, they've done this in Brendan Carr, the FCC has done this. They find these weird things that they can pretend that there's fraud about, like in California, the people on the Lifeline rolls that you saw them make a big stink. The immigrants were stealing money intended for broadband. That's what they're putting on here. They're going to put on a little stage play where they pretend that California specifically is engaged in fraud, which doesn't actually exist, so that they can, kick the can down the road. The thing that strikes me is she's really keen on the fact that they deployed broadband to Louisiana and Nebraska. But, when Sean and I were reporting out the Verge piece, we found, the actual deployments in those areas are literally like and I think it was Nebraska, one of the states, it's literally like 2 houses.
Right.
Two houses can get fixed
Yeah.
wireless, and they put out a press release. They had a big press event. They're like, look what we did with BEAD. We launched broadband, amazing. But those 2 states combined, I think, are like 100 people and a handful of houses that have actually gotten service.
Which is not the fault of the ISPs. I mean, Matt Larson is involved in that project from Vista Beam in Nebraska. But like, to be clear for people who haven't tracked this, if Ariel Roth had come into office and fallen into a coma and not done anything, we would be further along than we are because she was in power and awake.
Yeah, Louisiana was just about to deploy, just when the election happened. Wasn't that the case? Yep. Louisiana was like amongst the first states to just about, and so the fact that they got service 7 months, whatever later is not any sort of win. You're right. Like if they had done nothing whatsoever, the states would probably be better off. It's embarrassing.
The costs have gone up. Everything's gone up in the meantime while they're sitting there wasting time and pretending that they're saving the taxpayers' dollars when in fact they're raising the prices for all these folks in rural areas. We are seeing a shift of money from poor rural areas to Elon Musk's pockets. That's literally what we're watching. Nothing else.
And I'll just say one little small note about that keeps the historical revisionism that goes on, that even the Democratic congressman there, Congressman Peters, kind of engages in a little bit, where everybody tries to pretend like Congress hasn't for years turned the other way in getting the FCC to get the FCC to actually map things properly, and that the big thing that was holding up BEAD was just that. And now everybody wants to pretend like that wasn't a thing or whatever. And then here's Ariel Roth even trying to make it sound like, oh, well, there were some mapping issues. You think?
Yeah, they fought against the broadband providers of Republicans together, and some centrist Democrats fought against accurate broadband mapping for 15 straight years. They did not want and they won. They did not want an accurate picture of the lack of competition and the monopoly issues in the country, and they won that fight. So when Congress passed BEAD, a primary part was like, let's actually map broadband access in a relatively competent way. And that doesn't happen overnight. It's a big country. You have to work closely with states. It was going to take multiple years to do this. So when I saw,
and we still didn't do it.
No. And the thing is, it wasn't just Republicans. Democrats were, like Sean said, Democrats were jumping on that. Ezra Klein at the New York Times went on Jon Stewart's podcast and made a big stink about how BEAD was taking forever, how it was a big bureaucracy. Democrats can't build things anymore, and he didn't mention ARPA successfully deploying broadband, and he's disappeared from the conversation completely since. I have not seen Ezra Klein mention broadband one time since it was brought up in his podcast tour last fall, despite the fact that Republican policy changes have created massive new delays, which, is not the abundance future he was claiming to look for.
I didn't get a chance to watch all of it, but I did see, and to his credit, there was a congressman from Florida, a Republican congressman that had talked earlier. He talked specifically about how the American Rescue Plan money really connected millions of households.
The smaller rollout of the American Rescue Plan on broadband, because that's the only thing that's happened to date since 2021. We saw March of 11th, 2021, the American Rescue Plan was signed into law. In December 1st, 2022, Florida was one of 6 states to get funds under the American Rescue Plan Capital Projects Fund. I can tell you this was a huge change for a lot of folks down there. Everyone from small business owners like realtors, folks who are using Wi-Fi and GPS and other technologies for cattle and citrus and smart farming. It was a big help for them. But then you contrast it to the BEAD program itself. January 2025, the president unfortunately paused the BEAD program to revamp it. But here we are in, 18 months later, and we still see, I think only Louisiana is the only state that's had some broadband actually built already. When will Floridians actually see broadband built in Florida?
So we agree that expediting broadband needs to be front and center, and it's been front and center of everything we've done in course correcting the BEAD program. We had to course correct the program when we got here, precisely because the program had failed to connect any Americans during the previous administration. And now, only a year after the restructuring notice, we have deployment out the door. I was recently in Ogallala, Nebraska, for the groundbreaking of a BEAD project where a fixed wireless provider was delivering gigabit service to a community. That was a technology that was prohibited from participating and on an expedited timeline.
Look,
We wouldn't
that's
have seen that.
Yeah, I mean, expedited doesn't mean what you think it does, but I think one of the things that I would take away from that is just that Congress's hearings are broken. I mean, I have to say that, like, if you want to make me feel sorry for Ariel Roth, one of the things to do would be for me to watch that whole hearing where she has to answer the same question over and over again about her incompetence. But each senator or each senator and rep has to ask it, themselves. Sean, do you have a better reaction? Go ahead.
So, well, I'll just say that Congressman Soto, I guess, just deserves credit for at least recognizing, which no one else seems to remember, about the American Rescue Plan and
Yeah.
how much it's benefited and how
Yep.
much it's connected people. But the point about it isn't just that people are missing that, which he rightly points out. It's that the American Rescue Plan was fundamentally about giving money to the states, getting the money closer to the problem, closer to the people that understood where the challenges were, and allow them to figure it out. BEAD was the top-down thing, and then the Trump administration comes in and essentially tries to turn BEAD into the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, like it turned it
Right.
into an auction.
This is what happened, and I feel like it's really helpful to remember this because I was deeply frustrated when the American Rescue Plan came out because, like, the American Rescue Plan comes out. The idea is we're going to give all this money out through SLRFRF, the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, right? I've written about this, and Treasury has to write the rules, and Treasury doesn't know how to write rules about broadband, right? And so they're trying to figure it out. They bring in some consultants, they bring in some folks that know what they're doing, but the cable industry gets in there as well, and the cable industry writes these rules that are basically like, okay, you can only build it where there's absolutely nothing available, and so a bunch of the cities, the National League of Cities, Angelina Panettiere, and I, and a few other people. I shouldn't say a few other people. Others, like New America. There's a lot of folks that pushed. We put together this coalition to basically be like, look, you can't write the rules that way. You have to change the rules. And they were like, we got to get these rules out there. We're moving fast. And we were like, these rules are terrible. You got to change them. And so they listened to us. The Biden administration changed the rules and said basically, look, if you're a local government and you actually know that people aren't being served because they can't afford it or it's not there or whatever, then you can build. And they rejected the cable company argument. That is the argument that Ariel Roth is making over and over again, which is that, like, we have to have perfect information before we write a check. The Biden administration in the rescue plan rejected that ridiculous line of thought and said, we're going to move fast. We're going to trust states. We're going to trust localities, and they're going to do the best they can. And yeah, there might be some wasted investment, but it is better to get it out there and get it done. They did that, and that was a success. And now people I feel like no one recognizes that.
No, even the Democrats, like I mentioned with Ezra Klein, they didn't mention the fact that ARPA was quite successful and deployed fiber to a lot of, lower income, not just rural neighborhoods, but targeted lower income neighborhoods first. You gave the money to states who knew it, some local municipalities that actually knew what they were doing, and they did a good job with it. And it doesn't get mentioned. Democrats are not great in taking credit for it. And the Republicans just pretend that, like, ARPA didn't exist at all when it was really quite effective.
Or the Republicans are out, like, at press conferences taking credit for the connection.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
voted against
my
it,
God.
and then they took credit for
Yeah.
it in the press. That happened constantly. Yeah. Yeah.
And just to be clear, though, BEAD was a different kind of program. I don't think if our goal was to make sure that every last home was covered in each state, then BEAD was needed to go to this level of complexity. I actually think that's bad policy, though, myself. I think it's far better to basically say, here's a tranche of money to the states, and if there's enough leftover homes that need to be connected still, then we do another tranche, or like you figure. But you don't have a massively bloated, like, bureaucratic heavy program with all this stuff to do it. That is what you would need if you want to say, we know for certain that everyone's connected. I don't think we ever have that level of certainty on Earth. Like, I just don't think we do. And so, like, we need to embrace the rescue plan mentality for making investments.
Yeah, and I'll just say that what you're hitting on, in theory, it is kind of related to the non-deployment funds, because in theory, the non-deployment funds in BEAD are sort of supposed to be used to, okay, when everything is said and done, where are the gaps, and how can we use the money that's left over to address those gaps? And that also came up during the hearing today.
In January 2025, Louisiana became the first state in the nation to secure federal approval for a plan to deploy $1.3 billion in funding under the original Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment, or BEAD program. A program that designed to ensure that everyone, regardless of zip code, has access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. But instead of building on that progress, the Trump administration forced states to do years of approval planning, which delayed deployment and caused unnecessary uncertainty. While Louisiana's revised plan has now been approved again, roughly $800 million in Louisiana's BEAD non-deployment funding remains frozen. Those dollars were meant to expand telehealth, strengthen workforce development, improve digital skills, and help rural and underserved communities fully participate in today's economy. Administrator Roth, Louisiana kept its bargain. In a bipartisan manner, our communities have done their part. Why hasn't NTIA done theirs? What's the holdup in releasing the deployment?
Thank you, Congressman. Louisiana, as you've seen, been extremely successful in its final proposal. The governor of Louisiana has spoken publicly about the benefits and the benefit of the bargain reforms in promoting ubiquitous connectivity across the state, and we've already started to see deployment. We want to ensure that
I'm sorry, I have about 2 minutes left. Can you just tell me what's the holdup, respectfully?
we're trying to get the guidance right, not just rush money out the door,
So,
because
but when the Biden administration was trying to get the guidance right, you said you were wasting time. You can't have it both ways. Let me ask you a quick question. Yes or no? Can you assure me that Louisiana will receive its full BEAD allocation, including the $800 million in non-deployment funds?
so Congress allocated
So can you
funding to
assure
the
us that we'll
states.
get it? We have. So
Yes.
now it's in your park. Can you assure me and the people of Louisiana that the $800 million in non-deployment funds will be unfrozen?
The states will get their money according to the
So
law.
that's a yes?
Yes, we
Okay,
are
thank you.
fully
That's good.
intent.
Thousands of rural economically disadvantaged locations in Louisiana were initially slated for fiber in January 2025, have now, under the benefit of the bargain round, had BEAD funding diverted to Elon Musk's satellite services. How do you justify delivering lower quality broadband to rural and underserved communities under BEAD when higher performance options like fiber are available and states like mine are willing and able to invest in rural communities?
As I've said, performance is the gold standard, and the law was written in a tech neutral way, and our job is to ensure that every last community gets
But
priority
how do you
broadband
justify
service.
going to an inferior product over a more superior product?
Well, different types of technologies work better in different communities. Fiber can be great. In some places, it's really exorbitant. And, there was an example in Louisiana where.
Would you agree that Louisiana had passed all of its tests, was ready for everything to go, had shovels ready to go on ground? So what's different now? The only thing different now is a new administration that clearly wants to put his fingerprint on it. And I'm fine with that. But don't send us backwards when, in fact, Louisiana, under a Democratic governor and a Republican governor, did all the right things. And now the people of Louisiana are being punished, one, with a delay, two, with $800 million in non-deployment funds being frozen, and three, now getting a inferior product. That doesn't sound like progress. That sounds like gamesmanship.
Yeah, that was an excellent line of questioning, and she was not ready for that.
At all.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that like she came from Ted Cruz's office. These are hacks. These are not people that are like serious about the policy.
No.
And it is incredibly frustrating. I find it just maddening, because one of the things that he could have gone further in that line of questioning was to say the state of Louisiana met with these people. The state of Louisiana asked them what their preference was. The state of Louisiana made promises to these people that you are now going back on. And this should be a part of the calculus when you are taking that money away. And Sean, as we went to that clip, you said the benefit of the bargain is like half the money. The only reason is half the money is because they cut so much investment, right? I mean,
Exactly.
and they clearly intended, the Trump administration wanted to steal the money. They wanted to move it to other things. And now they're finding it difficult because governors are upset at the idea of losing billions of dollars
That's right.
legitimately. And so that's why the cuts were made. It was to screw the blue states, it was to screw rural areas and take the money and use it somewhere else. And so like it's just the whole piece of it is just so aggravating. And I do not think Ariel Roth even knows most of this stuff.
No, you can tell she's reading from a script there that's been outlined for her. She doesn't really understand the differences between the technology even. I mean, I could tell from
Right,
that line of
exactly.
questioning. She doesn't understand fiber versus Starlink. She's bought into the idea that Starlink is magic. She doesn't know that Starlink is too congested to operate at scale. You know, she's not prepared for that.
And, you know, I don't know if it was in this clip or in the previous one, but then she also said something that was blatantly not true. She said, oh, this, you know, this one project, I don't know if I think she was talking about the one in Nebraska, a wireless project, that until they came along, that wasn't even allowed in BEAD. What? Yes, it
Right.
Well,
was.
it's possible. So that project is using Tirana. It's possible it's using unlicensed frequencies. And this was something that we talked about before. The federal government has to make these rules, right? And so the question is, do you allow unlicensed wireless when that network is working very well? Matt Larson built a great network. Now, Sean, you and I could pop into there and start using the frequencies in that area and take away a fair amount of his bandwidth, right? And create interference for him and things like that. And there's nothing legally to stop us from doing that. And so there's reasons that the federal government made the decision. I don't think it was necessarily the right decision, but it was justifiable for why some technologies were excluded.
Well, you're right about that part of it, but what I'm trying to suggest is that the way she said it, she was trying to she was implying that wireless technology was excluded from BEAD, and that is not true. And it also just goes to show the level of ignorance that she has about these different internet access technologies. And so you're right about there being certain restrictions around, you know, spectrum and what have you. But as it relates to, broadly speaking, wireless satellite, like BEAD was all of the above. It just put its finger on the thumb for fiber networks for good reason. And I think of the various Congress members that were questioning Ariel Roth, I think Carter showed the greatest understanding of that when he flat out said, how is it a bargain that we're like going backwards and people are getting an inferior product?
Calling it a downgrade is important because it really is. You know, any telecom policy person is going to tell you drive fiber into as far as you can, into as rural of communities as you can. You fill in the rest with fixed wireless and 5G, and then low Earth satellite peppers the rest of the Earth and all the spotty cabins and RVs and boats.
I mean, let's get real about it. Let's get real about it, right? Because like what you're saying, Karl, I agree with. But let's put some numbers to it, right? I think the Trump administration was basically like, look, if it costs $4,000 to do fiber for a home, okay. If it costs $10,000, no. If it costs $22,000, we're going to laugh at you, right? East Carroll Parish, some of those areas, some of those average costs for the highest cost are like $20,000 per home. The question is, should the federal government drop $20,000 per home for a technology? And the answer is not, I would say, totally obvious, but I think the answer is an unqualified yes, because we're talking about 20 years, 40 years, 50 years of the kids born in those homes having unparalleled opportunity, or actually to say equal opportunity. Instead, what she said is, we don't think it is worth it to put $20,000 into a home so that these kids, this family, can have economic opportunity on par with the rest of the country.
Yeah.
That is wrong. We would get a much more of a return for making sure that those houses are welcome. It is expensive, but on average, it actually works out to being a pretty good deal over 40 or 60 years.
Totally agree. Great point. But I'll say it's actually even a little bit worse because I think that $20,000 per location cost was for East Carroll Parish more broadly. They already had Connexon has already deployed fiber to the most rural parts of East Carroll Parish. Lake Providence, the part that got left in the dust, is the densest part of East Carroll Parish. So the cost per locations were probably lower than that number for the more rural parts of the county. But overall, it's a travesty what's going on, and it's also disheartening to see the person who's supposed to be the top administrator at NTIA be so like in over her head. You can just tell by the responses to these questions.
Yeah, what we're talking about here is corruption, and she was just thrown in the room to kind of be the face of having to manage with people's anger at the corruption.
That's the part that I don't get about those people, is that like, I don't know, the Ariel Roths. I mean, even her boss Lutnick, like, the future is always that Trump's gonna like screw him. I don't get all these people that feel like, I don't know, maybe they just can't look to the future. They don't think about it, but like
They're true believers.
it's not like anyone's going to come to her aid
No.
as she's exposed as being incapable of doing her job.
No. But the hope is, she still fails up to some other political appointment, and I think that's most of their ambitions. This is just a stepgap, to something else for her. Maybe she'll run for Congress at some point, and I don't think these people even care about the jobs they're in. I think it's just stepping stone opportunism, and I think they've all drank the Kool-Aid of the Trumpism stuff, and I don't think there's a lot of introspection that really goes on with any.
And let's just end then with a rant about elites, because I do think this is like the culture of I want to say the East Coast. I don't want to. The East Coast is full of great people. I grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania, and I hate just bagging on it, but I will say there's this sense of like we're not going to call out Ariel Roth for being a bad person, for taking internet access away from millions of people, because someday Ariel might be my boss, or a friend of Ariel's might be my boss, or I might be looking for a job and I need a recommendation. And so no one can ever speak honestly about the damage that these people do or how incompetent they are. And so they rise up because there's always this sense of like, I might be burning a bridge if I'm honest about how bad this person is at their job.
Yeah.
True.
And it would sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that you're talking about like, elites and in the East, and I'm not going to defend the Northeast in particular, which is where I call home, but I take your point. But I tell you what isn't the answer is to elect a billionaire from the Northeast who is the inner circle, the most elite of elite, and somehow think that was the answer for working class in rural America. That to me is what blows my mind.
Yeah. The thing for them is this all gets much worse from here. Like a lot of this is going to get worse because the high cost of deployments and tariffs and wars and the high cost of running fiber is going to push a lot of people to default on their bids. And when that happens, even more people are going to get thrown at satellite broadband service, and they're not going to be happy with it. It's expensive. Starlink doesn't have good customer service, as we've talked about in past podcasts. So this all gets much worse from here. And I think it's going to make the RDOF bidding defaults that we've talked a lot about look like child's play by the time this is all done. So I think ultimately people will get annoyed, but it's probably going to come too late for us to do anything about it. So watching this happen is very train wreckish.
That's right. So, and we don't have time to get into it, but we haven't even talked about the different ISPs that have walked away from BEAD, who actually won a BEAD award and was like, you know what?
Yeah,
I'm out of here.
Yeah, no, there's a bunch that are walking away, more that are going to walk away.
A lot more.
I want to ask Karl first. Do you have any quick reaction to? I haven't even read the opinion. I haven't read coverage of the opinion, but the Supreme Court, as we're recording today, has basically given any president, not just President Trump, but presumably any president, carte blanche to fire any member of independent boards of the federal government that are not directly involved with the money supply, I guess, for reasons. Did you have any reaction to what this means for the future of the Federal Communications Commission?
It's one part of a continuing series of Supreme Court rulings that are destroying all functional corporate oversight, all labor rights, all environmental rights. It's going to be deadly. It's going to kill millions of people over the next decade, and the press is not explaining any of this to the public effectively. So that's
right.
My breakdown.
Well, I mean, I do think what we'll see is that Democrats will largely not take advantage of it. I think we'll see that there's this sense that they will continue to play by the old rules, which is that both parties should have a seat at the table, even if they don't get their way very often on the 3-2 agencies. But that Republicans will likely use it to eviscerate any kind of action that is hostile to the big, powerful corporations.
I think ultimately we're heading to a situation where the federal government does not function in the public interest, and we break down into a bickering coalition of states. I don't see, if this path doesn't change and the Supreme Court isn't reconstituted, I don't see federal government in the United States surviving it. I don't say that lightly. I don't mean to be hyperbolic.
Well, I think my read on history is that like it gets worse and then it gets better because people are forced to put energy into fixing it up, and there's enough motivation. So I do think that this is the Phoenix. I mean, speaking of the 250th, I think we're heading in Phoenix territory.
I want to believe that. Yeah.
Well, I hope you're right, and I suppose the only silver lining to this ruling is that if somehow there's a change in administration and what have you, that they'll be able to use this power to basically get rid of every last incompetent lackey that's been put in place to destroy, these different agencies. I mean, maybe that's really the only good news about it, is at least they can say, oh, well, yeah, let's get rid of everybody that, every bozo that was brought in to destroy an agency.
Yeah, we'll see. It's heading into July 4th weekend here. I guess the fireworks may be symbolic of a number of traditions that and political practices that are going up in smoke. But I feel like all this stuff around BEAD is deeply disheartening. But at the same time, I think we've learned some lessons and have evidence that when there's another effort to try to connect people, we really need to trust localities, that local specialized knowledge that they have. And this is actually a very conservative idea. I mean, if you look at like Hijack, like he's not a fan of government, but he is a fan of his information and how like you can actually use it in ways that centralized planning doesn't work out so well. And so we should embrace that when it comes to how we actually solve this, and trusting local leaders who are accountable to the community to actually make these investments where they're needed, rather than having dictated by states or the federal government, where the big lobbyists can be the ones that are shaping those decisions far away from the people's eyes. So I think that's the lesson out of all of this.
Can I just add one footnote to that, and also a shameless plug for something that we've been involved in that are coming up that speaks directly to that, which is that as much as we're talking about BEAD and all of the tomfoolery that's going on with that right now, there are other pathways, that there are alternatives, and there are communities right now who are figuring that out. And we have an upcoming ongoing series of webinars that we've been doing with the American Association for Public Broadband, where that will be the focus of communities that are actually building community-owned fiber, and it has nothing to do with BEAD. So it's important that even as we're talking about all of these problems with BEAD and all of these things that are going on with the federal government, that there are still things that local communities can and are doing.
Yeah, and if you really disagree, I'll be out at the Fiber Broadband Association here later in July in Bozeman, Montana, at the pre-conference, where I'll be hosting a panel, and afterwards you can punch me in the nose. Thank you, Karl. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
Right on.
All right, we're going to leave it there, and you can all go back to being buffered.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Unbuffered podcast. We have transcripts for this and other episodes available at ilsr.org/podcast. While you're there, check out our other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. Email us at podcast@communitynets.org with your ideas for the show. Follow us on Blue Sky. Our handle is @CommunityNets. You can catch the latest research from all of our initiatives by subscribing to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support at any amount helps keeps us going. Unbuffered is produced by Christopher Mitchell, with editing provided by me, Jordan Pittman. Until next time, thanks for listening.